Miss Martin Muses. Welcome to Miss Martin Muses, where we muse upon what makes me laugh, makes me cry, makes me happy, makes me sad, or just really ticks me off. Well, today we're going to talk about something that makes me happy and something that makes me sad, because there's sad parts, but nothing about the book really ticks me off. I will be doing a stream that will be ticking about what ticks me off, but it's not about the book Persuasion. It's about the movie, which shall not be named. But today we're talking about the book Persuasion, Jane Austen's Persuasion. And as my lovely guest, it is none other than herself, a troubled green.
Hello, everyone. How are you?
Oh, doing great. I'm really happy to see you back here on the stream. Last time I think we were together was when we were talking knitting.
Yeah, yeah, and then we did that stream together with Miss
Lady Grape.
Yeah, about Harry Potter. That was a fun stream. I had a good time on that stream.
Yeah, the Fantasy Tavern. Yeah, we're gonna try to get up on this again. I think the summer and other circumstances have kind of coming and knocked. I'll speak for myself, me around for a bit, real life. But happy to be back here, and I plan to be doing more of these streams about books and movies, whatever it is, that are good and that maybe people might not have heard about or known a lot about. And Persuasion is one of them. I think I did briefly mention already that there is a new movie on Netflix about it that really made me want to talk about the book, and I'll just leave it at that. It is a despicable movie, and it's not just me being ultra sensitive. I mean, everyone, even the feminists are up in arms about it. It's just so bad. But in any case, I'm really happy to have a troubled green here. And before we get started, I just want to say hi to all the people in the chat. We have Sultan Al Fahim. Thank you for being here. Sorry I don't show up for streams. Hey, no worries. It is what it is. I'm happy you're here, and of course I'm addressing everyone that will be doing it on the replay, and those of you that are lurking. I see you there. Thank you very much for being here at Miss Smart Muses as we talk about Persuasion. Now, Alasia, you had not read Persuasion before, so I'm going to open it up to you about maybe your first impressions having read the book. What do you think about it? I'm just going to let you go and tell us about your experience with Persuasion.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting because, like, I've always wanted to. I've wanted to do a deeper dive into Austen. I just never have, never had the time, and always like my deal is I always get like distracted by other books. So when you contacted me, I was like, okay, I have to sit down and read this book. So it was a good deadline to have. I have read Emma, and I've read Sense and Sensibilities and Pride and Prejudice, and it's interesting. This has, like, you had described it as a more somber tone. I also feel it's got a more mature tone than a lot of her other books. And I when I was doing some, reading up of the book itself, it's her last novel. So there's a lot to be said about, like, a lot of people have said it's a more mature tone than some of her other novels. And it's interesting. I don't know how to exactly say this, but anyone who's probably read a Jane Austen novel can understand what I'm saying. There are still irritating characters, and there are still characters that you're just like, why are you like this? And then there's, like, the main character who always has, like, a very certain personality type, rather than, she be a little more outgoing or she's more reserved. And in this case, Anne's quite reserved. I think she's an introvert like myself, so I really identified with her. But they're not as annoying as, like, say, the mom in Pride and Prejudice. They're just, I don't know, they're more even, I guess, is the best way to put it. So it's interesting. I never felt myself like being annoyed by how ridiculous some of the characters could behave. Like, and Emma's also a prime example of that. There are a lot of characters in Emma that I'm just like, stop talking. Why are you so annoying? But yeah, I thought Persuasion was really, I don't know, even keeled, I guess, is the best way to put it. And it just has a much more mature flavor than the other books. So I really appreciate it for that aspect of it.
Yeah. And I like what you said about like there are annoying characters, but it's different than like say maybe the more farcical characters
Mm-hmm,
in her
mm-hmm.
other ones. And on upon rereading this book, I reread it this week. It struck me that even the most annoying, the ones that you said, there's a reason behind it.
Yeah,
And I think that that's also maybe what makes it a more mature story. And when I say there's a reason behind it, uh, you have this family. The premise of the whole story is there is this baronet, this noble man. They've lost their mother,
mm-hmm.
and he was very irresponsible, spending money everywhere, very vain. He had 3 daughters, and it just seemed to me like there was no real affection he
Yeah,
had for them. And and you have like the oldest daughter who's just a bit of a witch, if you will, and
yes,
then you have the middle daughter, and yeah, and then the youngest. But what struck me, as opposed to the other novels, most of the characters, they are like 19, 20, 21. In other words, they're young.
yeah,
And back then in that society, when you were that age, it was like you had everything in front of you. This novel was the characters were in their 27, 28, 30, 31. The way women were perceived then, they didn't have their lives in front of them. These unmarried women, they were done. They were dried
mm-hmm.
up. There was no use for these women. The only thing a woman could hope of is if she had a lot of money. But usually,
Mm-hmm.
if you had a lot of money, you were snatched up by the time
Yep.
you were, say, for example, 27. And that this was highlighted by the fact that Anne, the heroine, she actually had met the love of her life, that she shouldn't have been this quote unquote dried up old spinster, lonely, just being passed around from family member to family member with no one thinking of her, that she actually met this Captain Wentworth, and they fell in love. They were very compatible. They got engaged, but she was persuaded, and that's where the the title comes from, a lot of persuasion, to break off the engagement by her a friend of her mother's and her godmother, and telling him that it was is an imprudent match. You know, he didn't have any money to speak of, and they they were young, and it just was going to be a bad idea. And then the horrible part is after they broke up, like she broke his heart,
Mm-hmm.
and he went off to the Navy, and she was left all alone to
Yep.
be the daughter who no one gave a rat's rear end about. She didn't find anyone to want to marry her. One person did propose, but she just wasn't interested, and he married the younger sister instead. And so it's not just a sense that she let the love of her life go. From that perspective, back then, she let her life go.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
And it's yeah,
It's so melancholy.
it is. It's what I found to be so strange about why her family insisted on they break off the engagement is she was the middle child, and there wasn't a huge dowry to be had. It's like why would you not want your daughter secure in some kind of position, um to not be a spinster, to not be a burden to your family. I mean, unless I missed it, there just never seemed to be an adequate explanation as to why these women had such an aversion to this man, other than his lack of income. Like, I mean, he had a decent income. It's not like he was destitute on the street, but it's like he wasn't a gentleman. But if she's the middle daughter with no dowry to really be spoken of, what was the problem? That I found odd, because it's like she had an opportunity and y'all ruined it.
Yeah. Well, I think it was kind of explained with some of the reasoning of Lady Russell, that was the godmother,
Mm-hmm.
that he not only didn't have a lot of money, but he didn't have a lot of stature, and it was a very quick engagement. I mean, they only knew
Okay.
each other for a few months,
Okay.
and at the end, Anne has a moment where she kind of reconciles Frederick with her friend. It's like, I want you all to be friends, and that he kind of warmed up to the idea. It's like, okay, fine, no hard feelings, because from her point of view, I guess she's 19, this soldier with no money, and he was only barely a lieutenant, I think, not very high in rank, wants to come and marry this woman, the son of a baronet. And it was just considered imprudent at the time. But yeah, in hindsight, it was like, oh, wait a second, that wouldn't have been such a bad thing. But also the fact is that he turned out to be very talented in the Navy and became a captain and also made a lot of money. And that was what they couldn't foresee.
Yes, exactly.
So I thought that Jane Austen was actually rather even-handed. I recall it being a little more like, oh, those villains, they didn't want her to be happy. But it was a little more even-keeled this time around when I read it. It's like, okay, I can kind of see where they're coming from, especially back then. But it was just horrible, though, that the fact is that they're like, oh, look at that spinster, and they barely even remembered that, well, actually, she did have a love.
Exactly, yeah. Yeah, because it's like, and it's a little bit aggravating that, like, Mrs. Russell or any of them can't, like, so when he steps back into the picture, when they're all in Bath and what's it called, Lyme and everything, that like they all don't have enough self-awareness to be like, yeah, we shouldn't have done that. Like she would have been happy, that and then Anne's just like sitting there suffering. She's like, I can barely be in the room with this man without getting choked up. But like none of her friends are like, yeah, that was a mistake. We shouldn't have done that. It was a little bit frustrating to see that.
Yeah. Well, and they were also very caught up with themselves.
Yes.
And in their lives, because her sister Mary was a little bit self-centered.
Oh, a little bit.
Yeah. And her husband Charles was kind of beleaguered. He had these two boys that were just running wild, and he also had the trouble that with his sisters, because a brother was also considered that they had to look after their sisters, and he had one sister that was engaged to a poor country clergyman that no one was too crazy about, even though he might come into money. And his sister was starting on this affair, not love affair in our sense of the word, but with Captain Wentworth. And so he was kind of caught up in that. And then poor Anne, just the way that maybe I related too much to Anne, and I always have, the way she's the nice one. She's the reliable one.
Yep.
But what that meant was no one ever thought about her.
Exactly.
Like, are you okay? You had people like demanding everyone else's attention, but she just was always fading in the background.
Yeah, like she's everyone else's pillar. She like really never has anyone to lean on herself, which I can also very much relate to.
Yeah.
I definitely powered through this book. A lot of the littler details were lost, and that's generally how, for me anyways, a Jane Austen novel goes. I got to read it 2 or 3 times to truly appreciate like all the intimate little things that happen in the book. I got the main gist of the story, but I really liked Anne this first time through, just like kind of seeing that like she's like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna grin and bear this. Like none of these people have anyone to lean on, so I'm gonna let them lean on me. And then like that little sweet moment when her 2-year-old nephew was climbing all over her back and wouldn't get off her, and Wentworth goes and gets the kid and takes him out of the room. Like he basically rescues her when no one else will. I was like, oh.
Yeah, it was, and they were also. I love those little hints of him actually still being considerate toward her. Yeah, there was that, and I don't know if you caught when they were out walking and Anne was like exhausted.
It was such a good scene.
Oh, I know. We're all like, oh, he thought of her. But it was so well done though, because they were just always talking past each other. Like,
yes,
because he was heartbroken and he was pissed off at her and he was upset. And she even was like, I understand. I don't know about you, but yeah, I've had a few guys in the past where I broke up with them. And yeah, maybe they weren't too warm the next time they saw me. And I'm like, well, yeah, I broke up with them.
Yeah,
what do I expect? And that he wouldn't even really look at her, or he would just say, like, "How do you do?" Like, because you had to be polite, but then he
Mhm.
did that with the carriage.
Yeah, that was
And
so sweet.
and even helped her up.
Yes. Yeah, and it's like that scene from the what is it, 2005 Pride and Prejudice, when Mr. Darcy helps Elizabeth into the carriage. Like, that was a huge deal. Taking a lady's hand and helping her into a carriage, that was a big deal. You didn't just do that for anybody. So I loved that little moment. I was like, oh, he's flirting with her.
Yeah. Well, no, exactly, and, well, and also people just didn't touch each other,
Yeah, you
period.
didn't. You just didn't touch each other.
Yeah, I mean, it was actually a thing that you wouldn't take a man's arm in
Mhm.
general unless he was your husband or you were engaged.
Yeah.
It just wasn't done. So just and I think that that's why they were so fond of dancing
Yes.
because that was the only
Yes.
time you could touch a man or a woman or, I guess hypothetically the men could, but, they would not a respectable lady.
Exactly,
So,
exactly. Yeah, like that's the only time that you could really get close and hold hands and all those things. So yeah, the dancing was huge, but yeah, helping a lady into a carriage was a big deal.
yeah. And, and I thought this was also very fiercely symbolic and true. She was never the one dancing. She was the one who they would say, "Oh, Anne, play the piano for us while the rest of us
Yes.
dance." That
Yep.
she never actually got that opportunity.
Mhm. Mhm.
Another example of why she's you know,
Yeah, she's
all
always in the
by
background.
myself.
Yeah, she's definitely the wallflower of this party of people in this like moment in time when they're all together. Like she is because like doesn't he sit down to the piano and like he's going to play and then she comes back into the room and he assumes he's like, oh, she wants to play, so I'm gonna get out of her way.
Yeah,
He's very quick to give her back her seat.
yeah, he's like, "Oh, I'm sorry, I've taken your seat." And her seat, what was her seat? To play the piano while everyone else had fun.
Exactly.
Yeah, and it took a whole different twist because in some of those stories, like Pride and Prejudice, it would actually be that a woman would sorry, the person that played the piano and sung and danced, that would be the person that everyone would sit around and go, "Oh, it's so lovely," like that famous scene from
Exactly.
Pride and Prejudice, yeah,
Mhm.
where he's watching her play the piano. He's like, "Oh my
Yes.
god, I am so in love with this woman," you know. But in this case, the playing of the piano was, oh, she's just there for her. And here's a good picture. I want to share this where this is from the good movie version. And if you ever do want to see a version of it, it's the one with Amanda Root and Kieran Hines. Let me see if I can do this here. And this is a very good picture where it's showing her. There we go. Just sitting there
Yeah.
playing the piano, being miserable, and they even described the way, her complexion and everything. It was just like drab, and
Mhm.
it wasn't just to me showing her her appearance. It was also mirroring what was going on inside her soul.
Exactly. Yeah. That's
Yeah.
yeah. No, I'm definitely going to look into uh a movie adaptation now because I really do want to see one. Obviously not the Netflix version, but definitely
Yeah.
going to look into a good version. So I will definitely look that up.
Yeah, that's the perfect one. They made another one like 2007, which was okay, but that one was easily the best one. And
Mhm.
Amanda Root was great, and of course, Kieran Hines was best because some of the other versions they'll make him be this big hottie and stuff, and it's like, well, he was a dude that was on a ship, and he wouldn't necessarily look perfect. You know what I
Yes,
mean? He would be windblown and
exactly.
all
A little
that kind of,
swarthy.
yeah. And I think that he's just such a darn good actor
Yeah.
that he blew it out of the park. I'm gonna try to maybe bring up a picture of him with that. But they also just did a great job of showing how how hurt he was, and he could show it with an eye, and just little looks here and there, telling you about what's really going on inside of them. And then symbolically, when they do get to Bath, that is after he realizes that his bad attitude, if you will,
Hmm.
was dangerous, because he was flirting with that very young girl, Louisa,
Hmm.
and because he was so bitter about Anne, who was persuaded to do other things, and she's like, "Well, no one will persuade me." So he, like, encouraged her in that, to the point where the dumb girl jumped off a wall
Oh, yeah, that
and
was
hit
so
her head.
irritating. Yeah, that was like definitely one of those moments that was like, okay, so Wentworth and Anne are the only two sane people in this entire group, and
Yeah.
everyone else is an idiot.
Yes, exactly. And yeah, and immediately he changes. He
Yes.
immediately changes, because he just realizes, "Oh my gosh, I could have gotten this girl killed," because
Yeah.
he was encouraging her to,
Well, and I mean, he even says that very first night at the party when everyone's teasing him about being a single, bachelor, unmarried and everything. He's like, "I'm looking for someone between 15 and 30," and I was like, "Dang, that's a okay." So I mean, he's like he's very flippant about the way he says what who he's looking for a wife and everything.
Mhm. Exactly, and it was his way of working through his hurt,
Exactly. Yeah.
and that's why he changed so much and became a little more emo. Boy, I'm trying to bring up a good picture of Kieran Hines as him that,
But it's interesting. He again, first time reading through and kind of having to speed read a little bit. He never had me fooled. I was like, dude, you are hurting something fierce being in this woman's presence again. Like,
mm,
he never struck me as like someone who was truly like, I'm gonna punish this girl just as hard as I can. I was just like I don't know. As the reader, I was like, oh, he's hurting like really bad, and they're still
mhm.
very much in love, I felt so bad for Anne because no one does give a rip about her, and here she is having to like endure all these just party after party after party with him. Um, so it was interesting. Like it, I don't know if Jane Austen wrote it that way, or maybe I was just kind of in tune with him. I don't know what it was, but he never had me fooled that he was actually like being a jerk. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, here's a picture of him in
Oh yeah.
the
Okay.
good movie. Look at
Yeah.
him. I mean, yeah,
Yes.
I can't zoom in, unfortunately, but yeah. No, exactly. Well, no, Jane Austen actually dropped hints
Hmm.
that, every now and then, like, he might look at her, or the 2 moments, like, when he was helping her out when that toddler was all over her,
Hmm.
and then the carriage moment, because let me put it this way, if you really don't care about somebody, you you just don't
You ignore
care, if
them.
that makes sense.
Yeah.
That even a negative emotion says, "Okay, there's still something going on.
Oh
There's
yeah,
still
for
something
sure.
going on." And I love this picture of him. I mean, there's several like this, because this actor is so good. He would, like, show it with his eyes often every
Right.
now and
Yeah,
then.
he's an incredible
Yeah.
actor.
Yeah, and as you can see, he's a little more windblown, not a pretty boy. I mean,
Hmm.
you buy that this is a man that's been on. Let's see, good point. Oh my gosh, yeah. So he's hurting. Well, and it does say something that he had made his fortune and been doing really well very quickly. He could have found a wife at any time.
He could have
And
easily.
the fact that he didn't also said something about maybe he was still holding a bit of a torch
Yep.
for Anne. Mhm.
Yeah.
But yeah. Well, and the scene in Lyme, I also liked it when they went to Lyme, because the whole lot of them went to visit some of his sailor friends, and you saw that they were a bit more poor.
Hmm.
They were all, like, in this small house on top of each other, but they seemed happy, uh,
Hmm.
and they seemed to all have genuine fondness for each other, and that scene there might have been what Anne would have been,
Yeah.
had he not, like, made all that money, but they didn't know that. They didn't know that.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and shifting topic just a little bit, it's interesting. That whole scene when they were talking about women being on board a ship, and that he was like, no woman will ever set foot on my ship, and all this stuff, and I thought that was an interesting conversation, because it's, the feminists love to cry about like this, that, and the other thing. We don't need to go into it. I'm sure everyone can guess what those things might be. About like someone like Jane Austen or the Bronte sisters or what have you. But it was interesting. She wrote this whole scene about women are like, you boys, we are perfectly capable of being comfortable on the ship. Yeah, it's a little crammed, but that means we get to see our husbands. Like, you guys need to, you're not giving us enough credit. We can suck it up for a little while and be on a ship if that means we get to be, on the other side, or like in Gibraltar with our husbands. That was a really, really enthralling scene that she wrote. And it's like, it's not to say in any way, shape, or form that she was like making a feminist argument back in 18 something or other, but it was also like, see, I mean, even back then, she was finding a way to stand on her own 2 feet, and for women to have somewhat of a voice within this very male-dominated society. I thought that was a really well-written scene, and that was like kind of shocking, because I don't remember there being scenes quite like that throughout like the other 3 books that I've read. Do you know what I mean?
No. And I think that also shows some of the maturity of it as well. And who knows, maybe someone can help me with who's done literary criticism. Maybe she felt a little more free to do that since she had gained some success and stuff. You know how the more success you get, or maybe it was just something that was coming from her heart. But yes, I found that very striking, that whole scene. And then also when she was discussing with that one dude, the sailor guy, about whether or not women or men love longer after all hope is lost. And then Anne points out, without sounding preachy, it's like, well, we have to stay at home. We don't have anywhere to go. So, and he said, well, all the books and all the stories. And she says, well, those are kind of written by men. But it didn't come across as the way it is nowadays. Like, oh, it's by men. It was like, it was more that like we're in a separate sphere. And so, so she said, we have, as I said, no outlet for it. While they'd even described in the book that what Frederick did the second he got his heart broken, he hauled ass into the sea. He's like, I'm going on a ship. And it was even a crappy ship. We learned like, it's like he didn't care. So a man, because he had more freedom, he could run off and I'll just forget about her and all that. But a woman, she had nothing to do but sit at home and cry.
For
lack of a better word,
Yeah, for sure. And no, you're right. She does deliver that very, like, it's a very gentle rebuke. It's a very like, you've got to try and see this from my perspective. It's there's nothing preachy about it. There's nothing like, here I am woman, hear me roar kind of thing. It's a very gentle like, no, we don't have anything else. Like you men are a lot freer than us. And so you're right. That last conversation that Wentworth overhears of her talking, that was really beautifully done, because it's a very gentle conversation. There's nothing like overly, I don't know, sharp about it, I guess is the word to use.
Yeah, it's not like men suck. It's just maybe hear it from my point of view. But it also say something about Wentworth, though, is that he always noticed how capable he would use those words. There's nobody more sensible, nobody more capable.
Like when the stupid young girl jumped off the wall to impress Wentworth, like he was like, no, Anne needs to be the one to stay because she's literally the only person who's capable of taking care of her. Like, and then Mary throws that fit. I wanted to slap Mary so hard. Mary drove me insane. I did not like Mary. But like he sees her worth where no one else does.
Yeah. Well, and speaking of Mary, because Louisa, she said, I think to Wentworth, she was like, gosh, I really wish Charles had married Anne, because even they were like, she would have been a much better sister-in-law because they liked each other. But good points. And on the other hand, though, maybe if she had to have stayed, then we wouldn't have had the rest of the plot where she went to Bath, and then we had all that stuff with Mr. Elliott. I'm going to talk about Mr. Elliott. There's always that villain, isn't there?
Yes, there's always that villain. Oh, he is creepy.
And it really struck me the way that Austen crafted it,
Mm-hmm.
that the same people that persuaded her to get rid of this nice but kind of poor guy by all appearances, Frederick, they were pushing Anne toward Mr. Elliott, and who had the outward appearances of things that were good, but underneath was actually, he was in debt, he was devious, he pretended to reconcile with them because they had had a big falling out over his first marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And the only reason he was doing it was he wanted to stop this one companion of Anne's sister from marrying her dad, because then he might have had another baby and then he would no longer be the heir to the estate.
Yes.
And he was willing to marry Anne into what would have ended up being a loveless marriage.
Yes.
A horrible marriage, and her family were all for it. And it also maybe goes to show you, it's like, okay, they didn't have their eyes open.
Yeah. No, Elliott was he was something else. Like, I mean, at one, like, initially you can kind of like excuse his behavior and chalk it up to youth and like being bullheaded and all these things, like, having aspirations and maybe feeling like you've been dealt kind of a harsh card. But to make your friend go into horrible debt and then destitute his wife when he dies, no, that's like a straight up, like, oh, he was an awful human being. And thank goodness, Anne found Miss Smith, and she was able to like get the truth out of what had happened, because I think Elliott would have probably destitute, because he literally, I think it was either in the letter or some of the gossip that Mrs. Smith had, that he was going to, once he married Anne, write a prenup that her father couldn't remarry.
Yeah. That was one of the rumors, though. They did say that maybe that wouldn't have held up.
Yeah. But still, I mean, like, to think that, even if it's a rumor, like, to even be thinking that, I'm like, that's kind of that's a really low individual.
Yeah. Well, and how weird that Miss Smith at first, when she thought that Anne was going to marry him, she was like, okay, I won't let her know the truth about it because she needed help with her debts and stuff. So she was like, well, when you and Mr. Elliott get married, maybe give me a good word for me. And I remember thinking that was odd. And then it turns out, and then when she goes, oh, thank God you don't like him. Okay, then let me tell the truth if you're not going to marry him. But I was because she was so desperate and destitute. Because again, a woman that was widowed and sick and wasn't, for whatever reason, didn't have any money, there was nothing she could do.
Yeah, that whole exchange, like, and that the background of the story and everything, and like her knowledge of Elliott was interesting. But I agree with you, like, her like initially being like, oh, so every young woman says that they're going to say no when they're going to be proposed, when they know they're going to be proposed to. Like, every young woman says that, and Anne's like, no, I'm not marrying that dude. I mean, he was a condescending jerk to her every time he talked to her. I was like, oh God, please don't get with this man. But I agree with you. I think that was kind of odd. But I mean, like, I don't know. It might have also been on Mrs. Smith's part, like, kind of, that might have been a test to Anne. I'm like, I'm going to push these waters and see where this goes, because that might have been, I don't know, that might have her been playing the game a little bit just to see like what Anne's reaction is, because when you're in love, it's like, and especially like, women back then, if you get dewy-eyed, it's like, oh no, he's perfect, he can do no wrong, blah blah blah. And she may have been seeing, like, she wanted to see where Anne was, like, infatuation wise, like how strong her level of infatuation was. I don't know. I don't know if she was not going to tell her the truth, either way. But I think, like, because when your eyes are open, you're a little more receptive to, like, hey, maybe he's not the best individual in the whole wide world. But when you're like, over the moon for him, like, you're not going to listen to criticism. You know what I mean?
Tell me about it. We've all been there, and you're like, okay, if I want to stay friends with this chick, we've all had friends that way.
Mhm.
And it's like, okay, I can't criticize this boyfriend. I mean, unless it gets really bad, and you gotta
Right.
lay down stomp your foot and say, hey, this person's really bad. But well, you know what the rule is. Every time a friend breaks up with someone, and they're like, yeah, he was a jerk, he was this, you never join in, because they might get back together and then they'll hate you for
Exactly.
having
Yes.
said it. You said he was a jerk and all that. It's like, oh, oops.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know if you caught this about Mr. Elliott, because Austen had to be very subtle because of the times, but how he ended up ruining Mrs. What was her name? Clay, the chick who he was afraid was going to marry the baronet and give him a son.
Hmm.
Did you catch that by chance?
Didn't she become his mistress?
Okay, you caught it. Okay, because it was so subtle, because she couldn't come out and say it. She said he removed her under his care to London. Yeah, that's exactly what he did. And
Yeah.
he didn't make her his mistress because he liked her, because he was always telling Anne, oh yeah, she's of low stature and all this. But the second he made her his mistress, she was ruined. She couldn't only not marry the baronet and become give him an heir. At that point, she couldn't marry anyone.
Yeah, she was so soiled. She was soiled. She was a fallen woman.
Yeah, and the fact that he did that, I mean, what complete scum. He because at first it was like, well, maybe he'll just do it. They were saying he wants to influence him away. Then it turns out, no, he's just gonna make her his mistress and most likely dump her even.
Yep. Yeah, no, he was a complete and utter scumbag, and thank goodness he. Okay, now, like I didn't unfortunately make it to the last page of the book. Did he marry Mary? did he marry the youngest sister?
Who, Elliott?
Yeah.
Oh no, Mary,
Okay.
the youngest one, was married to Charles.
Okay, all right.
It was the oldest sister.
Okay.
No, he didn't. No, he didn't. He just was, and frankly, that would have made sense if he'd have just married her, because it would have secured it. Oh wait, but then that wouldn't have stopped the dad from still marrying, would it?
Exactly. Yeah, so he was kind of like, damned if you do, damned if you don't. So he's like, well, I'm going to ruin everybody around me then.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the kind of person that is the definition of a toxic person.
Yes, that is what we call toxic masculinity, like actual toxic masculinity.
Exactly. Okay. Oh, more people are coming in. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Keck. I see you. I see Soul Assassin. Thank you. You all are dropping links. Thank you, Jacob Ironside, for being here. I think I said Boosh too. I appreciate you all being here as we're talking everything Persuasion. But underlying all of that whole thing is the way inheritance was. The fact that the cousin was going to inherit it to begin with, and they were worried about a son being born who could become the inheritor, because in a perfect world, or in our world today, it wouldn't have even been a question who would have inherited the estate and all that. It would have been Elizabeth, the oldest sister.
Yes.
But because women were not allowed to inherit, it had to be the male son. And if there wasn't a male son, yeah, it would go to a cousin, or an uncle, or the nearest. So, I mean, you see, it did suck to be women. And unfortunately, because we have all these screeching, for lack of a better word, harpies out there screaming about things that actually aren't real oppression, it gives a bad name to real feminism, if you know what I mean. It's like, yeah, it did suck. It did suck that women weren't allowed to inherit, and that they would be at the mercy of their brother, whether or not he was a dork or not. And that sensibility goes into that as well. Just the way there was nothing they could do because they were women.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it does. And that's like why I brought up the discussion about like the wives were like, you boys don't understand. Like, no, women are perfectly capable of being on a ship. We're a little more hardy than that. Give us some credit. Like, stop treating us like we're gonna fall apart beside the sea. Like, it was an interesting, like, it was a tad bit of a feminist argument, but it was a feminism like just within like, no, I'm capable of getting on a ship. That's cute that you think I can't, but I can. So just stop complaining about it. But they do. It's if you sit with Jane Austen, you can see the strength of these women, and you can see how like resolved they are to not be, you do not flinch when life deals them a harsh hand or whatever. So it's unfortunate that the Screaming Harpies do have to ruin stuff like this, because it is actually quite incredible to see how strong these women are. And yeah, I mean, Anne is a little melancholy. She kind of reminded me at points of Jane Eyre. Just the sitting at the piano, not being the one dancing. It can be a little melancholy, but she gets up the next morning and she presses on, and she doesn't have a bitter attitude. She doesn't take grief or anger out on anyone. She's still very amenable to all of her friends and family, even though they treat, in a lot of cases, treat her like dirt. She's still a woman of repute, and that takes strength.
Yes. And the fact that, she didn't become silly like her other siblings. Yeah. And to be honest, I think that's been a little bit of a criticism some have had of some Jane Austen characters. It's like, what supernatural power did Anne have that she didn't become like her older sister or younger sister or like her father? And the same thing in Pride and Prejudice, the way you had Elizabeth and her older sister, who were normal, but the rest of them were silly and ridiculous. It's like, and I think that's a valid criticism. It's like, okay, were they drinking maturity serum or something in their tea that everyone else missed?
For sure.
Yeah, but and the climax of the story, I think, happens when the letter that Wentworth writes. And now we'd had a little more interaction between them when they went to Bath, because everything changed after Louisa hit her head. Everything changed because it kind of jolted him out of what he was doing, and they had a few exchanges, and he was warming up to her. But then he writes her this letter where he just says, screw it. And he just lays it all out. What is it? I offer you my heart and soul or something. The same heart that you broke 7 years ago. I forget the exact words. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, man, let me hug you.
Right.
Let me love you. And it's just one of the best love letters ever. And then, of course, she's all, oh my gosh, he loves me. He loves me. And then the rest is history.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
Well, and it's cute to kind of like, I can't remember where it shifted exactly, and it might have been after Louisa hit her head, and she overheard Wentworth saying all those nice things about her, but that she kind of like started going out of her way to make sure that she could. Oh no, I think it was after the concert when like it dawned on her that people were starting to think that she and Elliott were becoming an item, like that was going to become a thing. And she's like, oh crap, I need to not send the wrong message to Wentworth. Like that she was doing everything in her power to make sure that she would run into him, that they'd bump into each other, that they could at least have an exchange of words, that she was trying to convey to him, like, nope, I have no interest in that man whatsoever. Please don't think that.
Yeah, and there was really no reason or way that she could get that message across. I felt her frustration because Elliott was all over her, and everyone was starting rumors, and it would have been considered uncouth for a woman to go, shut up, everyone, I don't like him.
Exactly. Yeah.
And it was, and he was jealous, and he even admitted that's why he also was starting to get cranky, because he felt it, and he was like, darn it, I love her. The hell?
Yeah, exactly. Well, and I think Jane Austen does a really. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead. I was just ranting.
I think Austen does like a really incredible job of like. I feel like in this book more so than I've seen in the others. Like you just said, like it wouldn't have been right for a young woman to be like, stop gossiping. I'm not interested in this guy. Like she couldn't just come out and say that. That like your conduct, your like literally your behavior in front of people is kind of what would determine which way this was going. And like when her sister was like, "Oh, it's Elliott, come here, Anne, like come here, come look at that out the window," and she's just would not, like, it's like a dog with a bone with this. That she's like, "Oh, it is him," and she just goes back and sits down. Like she tried her best not to have like any visible outburst of emotion one way or the other. She just was trying to remain even keeled. Like that was the only way you could convey, like, nope, I have no interest in this man, and I don't care that he's here. Because all the women were like, it was a bunch of hens like sitting around smiling, like, "Oh, how's she gonna react? He's here." And she's like, "Oh, it is," and then she just goes back and sits down. I thought that was a really well done little scene, because Anne is doing her best to be like, "Don't react, don't react, don't react."
Yeah, and you had to be subtle like that, and that's hard because sometimes, I'm going to stereotype, with men, they like things to be very direct. They're like, "Oh my gosh, just say what you want, just whatever, because subtlety, and that was it, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. They're like, men don't get your subtle hints.
Yes.
But that maybe in that time, it would have, or at least in the Jane Austen, because she was like, well, she was even thinking that I hope he gets this. I hope he gets this.
Yeah.
I hope he gets. I don't care.
Plenty of women around to like be like, "Oh, did you see how she reacted?" Like they would have had plenty of hens to break it down. Her reaction said.
Yeah, because that's the other thing. I mean, women, they didn't have any better time to how do I say this? They didn't have anything better to do.
Yep.
But sit
you
around
play
and
cards,
gossip.
you can gossip.
Exactly. But even as I say that out loud, I'm thinking, have we really changed that much?
No. No, we haven't. No, we're not.
No, we just what is it? We just go to the bathroom and
Yes.
that's where we move the stories. I'm trying to bring up another. Gosh darn it!
Yeah, we don't have parlors anymore. We have restrooms.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. This isn't. I'm not going to be able to do justice to this because they hate me. But this is a good scene from some of this. What we're talking about when Anne is trying to talk to Frederick, and everyone keeps it.
All right, Jacob Ironside's comment: Captain Wentworth and Colonel Brandon are the two most manly men in Jane Austen's works, probably because they were in the military. I have to agree with that.
You're right.
Yeah, they are. Yeah, not that I don't love Mr. Darcy, but no, Colonel Brandon, he will always be like my main Austen boy. He knew what he was about.
Good point. Oh my gosh, yeah. And yeah, they didn't have time to be. You couldn't be a spoiled brat, could you?
No.
Or a spoiled. I'm thinking of something else that rhymes with at or ought. Because and their sense of honor too.
Yes. Well, and that they knew that they couldn't hem-haw around. Like they had to make a decision. You had to like find a wife. You've only, they're potentially, Lord Byron might call you up. Like you have to find a wife. You have to be direct. But also that they've seen, like, again, it gets back to this, like, women are too delicate to handle the things that we've seen. But like, Colonel Brandon has this, he's like, when he's telling, the little girl, why can I never remember her name? The air is full of spices. Like he's been to India. He's seen a different side of life. And I think that's why he loved Marianne so much, is like she had that innocent sweetness about her. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Though I always felt there was a teeny tiny bit of creepiness in there where they said that it reminded him of the girl he loved 20 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Sorry, no, you're fine. Like, I mean, yeah, different time frame, but I see what you're saying.
That was my only slight complaint is like it was a little bit, you remind me of that teenage girl a long time ago. But well, even when he said a woman between 15 and 30 in Persuasion, and you're like, can we make that 18 at least?
Yeah. Yeah, but I mean, like, but also like with the life expectancy, I mean, I mean, 15 seems so young to us, but I mean, even, back in ancient Rome, they were marrying them off at 12. So I mean, yeah, I agree with you, but you also have to like keep in mind like the life expectancy back then.
Yeah. Well, and the idea that they also had to start popping off babies soon because the babies would die, and also quite
Yep,
often the women would die.
yep,
And
yep.
childbirth was really, really dangerous back then. Um, what is it? Jacob Ironside says Wentworth in that scene should just back in that guy. Well, I think they do a good way of describing in the book and in the 1995 movie where, yeah, he wanted to,
Yes, he
but
definitely
you
looks
had to be
bad.
polite. Yeah, yeah, yeah. But it is what it is. That sounds like hell. Yeah. So I mean, they do live happily ever after, but I also think it's interesting how they um they live happily ever after with the other characters, because that one girl does end up marrying the clergy guy that no one was too, that some of the people weren't too crazy about, and then Louisa marries that emo the
Yeah.
emo dude who always read Byron, who lost his fiance,
Yes.
and you get the sense that Anne really liked her in-laws, or like her who would be her sister-in-law, like in
Mhm.
the Admiral, they really got along. Um, and her stories do tend to end with those kind of happily ever afters.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like Pride and Prejudice, I feel like Lydia's story ends so sadly, but I mean, she brought that on herself. But yeah, I mean, it is interesting that I don't know, for like her last novel, I feel like this ends on a higher note than some of the others. And I mean, like I don't know, again, being her last novel, you're right. This is the only character that we get that's not 18. Um, you have to wonder if like this was Jane Austen's like this like almost this was her wishful like this should have been my life, because didn't she turn down a proposal? Was she
Well,
not
yeah,
like
yes, she was proposed to actually by Charles, the guy who ended up marrying her sister.
okay, okay, yeah, so I have to wonder if like she had a few regrets, the way her life kind of turned out, and I don't know, I don't know, this story just kind of made me stop and wonder because Anne is so old.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't know. I mean, there is some part of me that wonders in the back of my head, like, let's just imagine that Wentworth never came back. Would she have eventually maybe been able to be a little bit happy? I don't know.
Yeah, I don't.
Be-
I mean,
because
before he comes back, she seems like she's moving on with her life, and that she's, just kind of accepted her role in society of just this is who I am and this is what I'm always going to be. But I don't know if she was happy.
yeah, she was just kind of living life and it was passing by. And again, she was just
Yes.
the one that no one noticed, but everyone depended on.
Yep. Yep. Very much so.
Yeah. But there was one interesting postscript toward the very end when they said that Anne's father, who was just ridiculous, he didn't mind the Frederick and all that, and it's just like, oh, okay, sure, whatever. It really wasn't important to him, so he gave his blessing to the marriage. But the one that ended up kind of alone, especially after what Mr. Elliott did with her friend, was Elizabeth. That she seems like they said that she doesn't seem to have any prospects, and
Hmm.
lost her friend, lost perhaps the man that she thought she was going to marry, Mr. Elliott. So she's the only one I think that ends up kind of sucking.
Yeah, which is sad, but I don't
Yeah.
know. I feel like Jane Austen probably saw like that happen one too many times for her to like feel like everyone's going to get that blissful, marriage. Probably there were a lot of girls that she saw that should have been married off, but never sadly were, and were kind of left to kind of wallow away. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Well, Jane Austen herself.
Yep, exactly.
But and that's a whole discussion for another time. The popularity of these Jane Austen movies, the ones that started up in the 90s, the craze, with the Pride and Prejudice, they did all of those.
Mm-hmm.
I remember there was a good debate about that. Is that what is happiness? And they never show truly unhappy marriages in these. You see the Bennets in Pride and Prejudice, like Lizzie's father and mother.
Yeah.
They didn't really have a happy marriage.
They had a tolerable marriage.
Yeah, tolerable marriage. And then you had the character Charlotte, who basically sought out a tolerable marriage when she married the ridiculous clergyman, and Elizabeth's like, "What are you doing?" And she's like, "All I want is a comfortable home." And that was, and that it turned out, like when Lizzie went to visit her, she was like, "Oh my gosh, this is the best thing for her friend, her Charlotte," that she actually scored, even though it was kind of a bit sad, that fact that sometimes being in a tolerable marriage was the best you could do. Yep. And a happy marriage. And the only story that I know of from that era that showed a nightmare marriage was written by one of the Bronte sisters, not Charlotte and not Emily. I forget which one. The other Bronte sister that wrote, called The Tenet of Wildfell Hall. Have you ever seen that?
I have not.
Or read that? It is one hell of a story, and I couldn't believe it was even published, because what that is about, there's a lady pretending to be a widow, kind of a thing, or she never talks about her husband, and that she actually had been in a nightmare marriage and ran off with her child, and he was coming after. I mean, all that kind of a thing. That's the only time you actually see that. Besides that, they usually say that marriage is good, marriage is fun. Isn't it all great? And not always.
Yep. Yeah. And I mean, like, she alludes to Lydia and I can't remember his name. Have a happy Wickham. Thank you. That he gambles away their money, and that they're basically living destitute. Like, I mean, she hints that is probably what happens to them, but she never comes out and says that, like, that elopement and that very patched up marriage was ever a very happy one. So yeah, that's the only other marriage I can think of.
Yeah, because part of the delicacy of the situation, and he was going to cheat on her.
Oh, for sure. Oh, absolutely. He was such a scumbag.
Yeah. Yeah. What a situation. And not to be melancholy, but I used to tell people that the next line of any sequel to any of these Jane Austen ones was, they got happily married, she got pregnant and died in childbirth.
Yeah.
Which probably would happen. And so he went and sought the second sister.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's probably a good 50-50 chance of that happening.
Yeah. And they would. They marry like, well, I'll try the other one. Yeah. Let's see. Oh, thank you, Jacob. I was looking up. Yes. Was it Soul Assassin? No, it's early in the 1800s. Yeah. It's 18. Because it was right before Napoleon. It was right after the Napoleon stuff.
Yeah. So the title page, the original publication was 1818. So it was published on December 20. Okay, well, it was published on December 20th, 1817.
Yeah.
So yeah, because there's a letter in there that references 1803. So it's set somewhere in that time frame.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. Yeah, very grim. Yeah, it is grim. And but I like the way that these stories make us think.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes people misread the message that is supposed to be conveyed in this story. Like, for example, the horrendous movie version, which I'm going to rip apart with Lady Gravemaster at a later time. One of the last lines is, Anne is looking at the camera saying, "Don't let anyone tell you who to love. Love who you want to love. Be
Mhm.
happy. You want to be happy." And I'm like, oh my gosh, that's not the point.
Yeah.
Um, and but I enjoyed this time around reading it, the forgiveness factor that they Anne was able to forgive Lady Russell, and eventually Frederick kind of sort of maybe got over it a little bit. It's that sometimes maybe you do have to forgive.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that you're willing to come back to the relationship. I think that says a lot about the both of them, that he was even willing to revisit the idea because he was so hurt. Well, they both were, but the fact that he was still willing to come back to that, says also about the level of forgiveness he was willing to deal to her.
Yeah. Soul Assassin says Pride, Prejudice, and Yes, yes, we know all about that. Yeah, that's the true story. Yeah, that he was able to forgive her. I always wondered, like, what if Louisa really had died? Because I mean, she hit her head. I mean, she could have
Dead.
easily. And they thought she was dead at first.
Yeah,
And
that was a pretty bad concussion for her to go unconscious like that immediately.
you know, um, well, and they showed in the movie even better. It's like, wait, how the hell is she? And it's like, oh, it's like, yeah, because those cobblestone kind of things that they had, and it was a wall, and she kind of hit hard, and bam, her head.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when we think of people getting death blows, we think of something really intense and stuff. No, it's like, no, sometimes you can just bonk your head on the sidewalk.
Yeah,
Uh,
like literally, sometimes it just takes hitting your temple in the right place.
yeah, precisely. So please, everyone, walk carefully.
Yes,
So
don't jump off walls.
don't jump on walls. But but I like it that was the catalyst that woke up Frederick, and he's like,
Yeah, for
okay,
sure.
enough already.
Yeah.
But it also says something to the effect of maybe sometimes you also need to step out a little bit and take a chance.
Yes.
I let's just say that Frederick never got over it, or that he wrote her that love letter and she really did want to marry Mr. Elliott. At least that he could have said he tried.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, it's taking a chance. It's being willing to take a risk. That I thought was very interesting, and he's like willing to put his trust back in her, even like he's willing to because I feel like for a man, if she were to had been like, oh no, I'm gonna marry Elliot, what if she gossiped about that to all of her friends? Like, what if like, oh, what a weak man, he can't move on from me, like that's opening yourself up to criticism by your peers, because what if she'd gone and gossiped about that to everybody? You know what I mean?
Yeah, because women are witches. I mean, I hate to be so hard on my sex, but see, I
Yeah.
think that's also why Jane Austen has so many of these kind of characters, because
Yes.
that's what she would see. She would go to these balls. She would see the
Mm-hmm.
way these women were, how catty they were.
Yep.
Yeah, Jacob Ironside, is it me or is there a bunch of silly women in these books? Six Elizabeth. Yeah, exactly. That's what we're saying. Yeah, precisely. Yeah, they're talking about leeches and all sorts of things. It's like, yeah, I would not want to have a concussion back in the 19th century.
Yeah.
Women can be very cruel. Well, this is a stereotype, I am aware, because I know a lot of gossipy men, but general, men will go and just confront someone or say, "What the hell, man?" And women will sit and plot for a year and whisper
Yes.
and gossip and do all sorts of things. Now, of course, now we have the internet. Send text messages. We'll do it in the cruelest way possible. Yeah, and maybe it is because in general, most of the time, physical strength versus mental strength, meaning that women can't usually go out and punch someone's daylights out, but they can do it in other ways with their
Exactly.
words and with their power. But well, good stuff. I just forgot how much I love this, and I cannot tell you enough. If you can get a hold of the 1995 version with Amanda Root and Kieran Hines, it is a perfect adaptation of
Okay.
this.
Yeah, no, I
Yeah,
for sure will. I'm
yeah,
definitely I'm gonna reread it because again I powered through it and I missed all those little details that make Jane Austen books great. And that's interesting. Like I read a couple of the reviews like on Bookstagram of like feminists of like, you know, girls who lean into the woke narrative who are just kind of ripping this movie apart. It was interesting. A lot of them said um, they dumbed down the dialogue to such a point that it's insulting to audiences who know anything about Jane Austen. So I thought that was really fascinating that even they were like, we don't need to be talked down to in order to understand something. So I definitely want to go back and reread and enjoy it and you know absorb all those little details. So I'm really glad I read it because again I've been putting it off, but I'm for sure gonna go find that movie now. I really want to watch
nice.
it.
Yeah, the real one. Yeah, watch the real one.
Yes, I will.
Yeah, and the fake one, I just it came up, and I'm like, okay, let me watch this because as much as I despise certain things, it's not fair if I'm going to rip into something. I think I need to watch it.
For sure,
With
absolutely.
one exception, I think maybe I need to just put a disclaimer across this, except for the Rings of Power,
Yes.
because everything about that we all know already.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, the second they admitted, oh, this isn't the story Tolkien wrote. We don't have the rights to that. It's like, okay, fair game, rip into it, whatever it is, because
Yep.
they said themselves. And the
Yeah.
fact that they keep trying to justify it and say,
Yeah. I will not be watching it either.
no, I refuse. Yeah, I know some people want to review it or have me. It's like, no, I ain't gonna do it.
Yep. Nope. I'm not going to even sail the high seas. I'm not giving Amazon that satisfaction.
Yeah, and it goes back to you don't. These are beloved characters. A lot of them are. I don't want to see them doing things
Neither do I.
that you know what I mean. You get it burned
Yep.
in your brain. Like
Mhm.
look at how many people, including me, that can't get over Luke Skywalker and that monster green milk
Yes.
breast thing.
Yep. Yep.
I
Yep.
mean, you just can't get that image out of your head. And we already have confirmed wet T-shirt Galadriel.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm so good. I'm so good. I don't need any more. I don't need anything
Like,
burned into my brain.
I don't need to see that.
Well, and Celeborn is dead, so that tells me right there that this isn't Tolkien. So I'm like, I feel no qualms about not watching this.
yeah, and I love the way that they're being very hemming and hawing around that, and it's like, no, I think we've pretty much figured it out.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Bush McFadden says the head writer said they had they could make a better, more modern story, like Level Errant. It's insane. Okay, I'm assuming you're talking about Rings of Power. Yes, boo. Okay, don't waste your time with glorified fan fiction. Exactly. Ringing of Power. Yeah. Well, see, that's the other thing. If I wanted to read fan fiction, I'd just go to fanfiction.net.
Exactly, or archive of our own. Like, yeah.
Yeah, but usually they have a little more respect for
Yes.
the material.
Those are actual fans.
Yeah, and maybe that's a discussion for another time about what makes a good adaptation. But as we're kind of wrapping up this party, I always like to open it up to my guest. Is there anything maybe that we didn't touch on about the topic about persuasion? Anything that you would like to say, or perhaps even make a conclusion?
No, not really. I think we did hit on everything. Again, I just really appreciated that this was a more mature book than some of the others. You know, I was telling Miss Martin Muse behind the scenes, and some of my people know this, that I will never be able to read Emma again without becoming furious because my professors at my woke university ruined it for me. But that aside, like Emma is still very silly. It's a little more cutesy in my opinion. I like that this was an elevated novel. I really did appreciate that. So, and I like that Wentworth is always the silent hero in the background. He's always waiting. He's very attentive to Anne. He's always trying to, you know, even though he's mad and he's hurt and he's upset, he's always trying to see what her needs are, which, you know, again, like that's that idea of like, let men be men, let them be chivalrous, let them be our heroes, and let them step up for us. And it was really nice to see that she was receptive to that, and that he was still doing that, even though there was this, angst between them. So I really liked that. It was, I really like Wentworth. He's gonna, I think, quickly become one of my favorite Austen boys.
Yay! I'm so glad. Well, yeah, and I should also add that he not only was so attentive to Anne, but also to everyone else.
Yes.
Even people, you could tell he was like, okay, this person's a little bit annoying or something, but he was always polite, always helpful.
He was the leader of the group. He very effortlessly steps into the role of leader when he's in that group of people.
Exactly. Yeah. So we love us some Captain Wentworth, Frederick Wentworth, and
Yes.
And we love this story. Well, I want to thank you so much for being on here. I do appreciate it, and all the people in my chat, all the people in the chat. Thank you. You're always adding to it, and I appreciate you being here. Thank you for all those that will be watching this on the rerun. And if you haven't already, please like, share, and subscribe. Oh, look who's here. Xianzu, I think, watching the end of the film threat stream be on shortly. Oh, okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, we're about to wrap up, but I appreciate you stopping in and maybe learning a little bit. And if you are so inclined to learn about Persuasion, read the book, or at least maybe watch the good movie, the 1995 version. As I always tell men, if it's not your cup of tea, just watch and take notes, because that's what chicks like.
Yes.
All right, so take notes. Everything that Frederick Wentworth does, except when he was being a bit petty because he was bitter and like help that girl falling off the wall. Besides that, just about everything he does is perfect. So
yes.
Yeah. So we love it. Oh, well, we've even got music. Okay.
Sorry, that was my phone.
The rings of power are wedding rings. Sauron and Galadriel will get married. Hey, you know what? I've actually called that I don't think they're going to get married, but I think they are going to have an affair and all that. And it's just enough to make me want to hurl. Yep. Johnny64 says, "Good job, ladies." Oh, well, thank you. We definitely try here, and this is a great. Alicia is a great guest. I think the 95 Persuasion is on Netflix. Oh, if it is, yeah. Don't get tricked though by the one with the 50 Shades of Grey chick. All right, because that is also on Netflix. I own the 95 Persuasion, so that's how I also rewatched that before I watched this because I wanted to. Slim Shady Sauron. Oh my gosh. Well, no, I think I even said on Twitter, and people got mad at me, like, don't give them ideas that it's going to be kind of like Dumbledore and Grindelwald. You know how Dumbledore held off fighting him for so long because, I love him.
Yeah.
I swear if they do Galadriel and Sauron, I mean, it's already been, spoiler, but big surprise. We already know that Sauron's that human dude in disguise. So.
Yeah. I'm over it. I'm just no.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, well, here I was trying to explain this to my mother because she was like, she didn't know until I explained it to her. It's like, well, don't you realize that they're not adapting the story Tolkien wrote? And she was like, why? And I'm like, because they don't have the rights. And she said, so why are they even making a movie? So Tolkien wrote the story of what happened before The Hobbit. We have it.
Yes.
This is just people on an ego trip.
Yep. Cash grab. That's all it is. So.
Cash grab. Well, I think it's an ego grab.
Yes.
What's his face? Bezos. What didn't he say?
I want to make my Game of Thrones.
You got it. And it's like, yeah, okay. Well, I'm kind of not happy for you. Well, have a great day, everyone. Have a great day, and be certain. If you are proposed to by Captain Frederick Wentworth, do not be persuaded to break the engagement. Stick with it. He'll make it worth it. Goodbye.